So, hello, I'm here in the Chauvin Arnoux studio with our special guest star, Mr. David Savoury, Esquire.
Well, thanks for having me here, Kev, in this freezing cold studio. Not as warm as it looks, but it is winter.
It is winter, so so we're making the most of it, but yeah, we will be putting the coats back on pretty much straight away since we've finished here. But while we've got Dave here, we decided to just talk about a few of the products that you've been looking at for us, particularly our new MFT.
Indeed, what has Father Christmas got in your stocking, Kevin? Quite the treat coming.
So, that said, let's get started. So, what we're going to look at, well, this is our MFT. This is the Chauvin Arnoux MFT. This is the top of the range CA 6117 multifunction tester. So, this is really something that there's probably not, people haven't really seen this much in the UK market. So, it's something we're currently having a look at and we'll be bringing to the UK market in the coming months. But really, we've wanted to just have a quick chat over it. I've had a play with it off screen. Dave, you've had it for a few days and had a play with it?
I have indeed, yes. Interesting bit of kit.
Yeah, so we're just going to give you our first thoughts really from that side of things, and obviously we'll follow up with some more detailed videos as time progresses. But this is just really our quick first thoughts, giving you an introduction to the MFT. The
form factor, old chap, is quite different to anything else on the market that I've seen.
You can probably see it here, it looks pretty normal, but when you turn it sideways, you know, this is quite a chunky beast, I think we'd refer to that. Yeah. It's away from the normal traditional form factor, isn't it, where you sort of expect a screen on the front and then the depth of the thing sort of going away from you in that direction.
I'll tell you what, two things I like about it. A, that it sits on the desk so nicely, as modelled here by Kevin.
Yeah,
and also that your interface, your buttons and your test lead inputs are all right there in front of you. They're not on the side, they're not on the top, they're not somewhere a bit out of the way where you've got to adjust it around to see what's plugged in where.
I think it's quite ergonomic. Originally when I saw it, I thought this is quite chunky, but really for holding it, and actually if you can see there, sort of everything falls nicely, the test button, the jog wheels, the sort of direction pad, the soft keys, everything is really there in front of you, and it sort of feels nice in the hand, shall we say.
Yes, and it is dial and soft key driven, yes. Easy for me to say, but it's not touchscreen, but a lot of people like that. I, for one, like to know where my dial is pointing when I'm operating my instrument.
Yeah, and I think even though it has got the soft keys, I don't think the menus are too embedded. It's generally sort of maybe one layer or something like that.
It's very easy to drive.
See everything on. There's also a lot of sort of retail space on the screen. It's a very big screen, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's one of the biggest screens I think I've seen on an MFT. Yeah. Colour screen, of course, everything is these days, and colour screens can be a bit heavy on the old battery life, can't they?
Yeah, but luckily with this, I'm hoping, we haven't done much in the way of battery testing yet because we haven't used it long term, but actually you have got a proper lithium-ion battery in there, and that battery pack can just be popped out and another one popped in just like you do with a power tool, so I'm expecting reasonable battery life from this.
I do find with these sort of test instruments where you do have quite a bright colour screen and where the buttons aren't backlit, that if you're in a dark environment stuck under someone's stairs or whatever, that can be a bit in your face, I found with previous testers, but you do at least have a nice accessible button there to turn off the backlight. That display is still on, we can still see it in this live here, but you might pick up on camera, but there is that option.
But like you say, if you're in a cupboard under the stairs or something like that, or a kitchen cupboard where you're trying to see, you can just knock that off and it does give you that option. But yeah, the form factor, it's quite heavy, and I think you actually weighed these, didn't you? And actually,
over 2 kilos. So yeah, it is a weighty instrument.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I do like the form factor. I do think that's a nice thing to plonk onto your desk.
I thought when I saw this, and you know, this is true of any Chauvin Arnoux equipment, and I would say that because obviously, you know, Chauvin Arnoux employee. But to me, it feels a quality thing. You know, the buttons have got a good click to them. This is something in the test and measurement industry, you know, the click to your rotary dials, the feel of the buttons, the quality of the plastics and the finishes that are used in it. It does feel, you know, I joked originally you can knock a fence post in with it, and I think you probably could. We haven't actually done any drop tests tested or anything like that, but you know, the feel of it does feel like a quality item, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're used to making instruments that are put to use in heavy commercial environments, aren't you? So I think the weight and the form factor are indicative of that being the kind of market that it's really sort of aimed for.
Yeah, I mean, talking more about the market actually with this, although it's quite new to the UK, has actually been sold in vast numbers all across Europe and other countries around the world as well. So it is very popular in other countries. And in a lot of those places, the emphasis on the testing isn't so much domestic, it is more on the commercial industrial side. So you can see it probably was made and targeted more at the commercial industrial market. It's something we're hoping that will catch on in the UK and give people another option when they're looking for an MFT, particularly if they're in that commercial industrial space where they want something that's a bit chunky, that does the job, that's got also some increased functionality, which we'll talk about now. So, the features, we both had a play with this offline. We've tried it out on the checkbox, we've tried it out in your cave.
Put it through its paces to a certain extent, yes.
So, so we'll start off, just go with the range. I mean, obviously one of the good things we already pointed out with this is it's all straightforward. It's literally on the dial, you've got off, and then you just move through your various ranges, and then you've got your soft keys there to just pick the various bits in there. So the continuity range is pretty much straightforward, does what it says on the tin really, isn't it?
It does, and you have the option to do a pulse test, which is where it just does the test and then ends the test, or a continuous test, which is handy for fault finding. Of course, with the continuous test, you also have the ability to switch on a tone on that. So if you're trying to trace something, then you can leave it running on a tone and listen out when the tone breaks or when the tone makes, depending on what kind of testing you're doing. Yeah,
and we've also got the alarm on there as well, haven't we, for the under a certain level, I think?
Yes, there is that as well, so that you can set, as Kevin says, an audible tone below certain configurable thresholds.
And that's a feature common to a lot of the ranges on here. You've got the option for this sort of configurable alert, and you can basically set that so that if you're not visibly watching the instrument, you can make sure you're getting a reading within certain parameters. So the continuity range on here, again, as we said, the test is relatively straightforward. I think it works. It's got quite a good range on it, and it's actually got a sort of like a medium resistance range on it, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the full range will go up to 400 kiloohms, which is quite a lot for an instrument like this. I'm not aware of any other MFTs I've got quite that range. Normally they're around 2,000 ohms, so it will go up quite high. So
you've got the sort of traditional continuity range in there. But say if you've got a partial short, a sort of a low resistancy type fault that would just give you an open circuit on a low resistance range, you've got this sort of medium resistance value that you can set that goes up and
which is interesting, because if you had that kind of fault, you may find that your continuity test doesn't pick it up, but your IR test does on a traditional tester. But this has a better chance of picking up that fault just on a continuity test. Yeah,
because the IR tester, sometimes their range won't go low enough to pick those sort of things up, so it almost just reads like a short on the IR tester.
Yeah.
But it's intermediate, and sometimes that can be quite useful on fault finding and in certain scenarios. So that was something that we picked up in there. It was a bit of a nice to have, but realistically with the continuity, it's pretty straightforward in there, isn't it? You know, I think that's
what it says on the tin.
Yeah. So there's a 200 milliamp range, which is your sort of standard current for this. I noticed there is a 12 milliamp range on here as well. So in certain scenarios, sometimes people want to keep the test current quite low, just in case there's any chance of damage, maybe with sensitive electronic equipment or something. So again, having that 12 milliamp range on there is another nice to have that maybe you don't get on other sort of more standard MFTs. So next one, insulation. So again, does pretty much what it says on the tin. It goes all the way up to 1,000 volts.
Yes, we have a bit of a range, don't we? 50, 100, 250, 500 and 1,000. Some testers don't quite have the range. They sometimes drop the 50 and 100. I suppose for most testing under BS 7671, it's only the 250 and 500 that most of us are ever going to use, but it's nice to know that those other options are there for any testing where you need them, particularly with things like if you're testing something like salve and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So again, it sort of shows that commercial industrial type.
Yeah, something more than your house bashing might require.
But generally, it pretty much does what it says on the tin, really, with that, doesn't it? Again, you've got the alerts function in there, so you could set an alarm for certain levels when you're testing. But generally, from an insulation resistance test point of view, it does what you would want really from that side of things.
Absolutely.
And the results seemed accurate. You know, we tested it on your checkboxes and on your rigs, and it seemed to be giving the readings and stable readings as well.
What you'd hope it would, and it does.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing just maybe to point out on here, and again, I don't know if you'll see this on the display, but also if we do the test, you also get this sort of digital analog readout on the top. So you actually get this sort of, you know, digital representation of a bar chart moving across as well.
Yeah, it gives you your,
which is quite nice.
You get your absolute reading, which is good, but it's nice to see that analog scale, and you get that on a few tests, as I mentioned that in the video in the past. The advantage of having an analog scale is, of course, you get to see where on the scale of things you are.
Yeah.
Whether you're at the top end or the bottom end. It's logarithmic scale, so it's laid out as being sort of bottom end heavy, if you like, in terms of its granularity. But it gives you an idea if you're not sure of where you're supposed to be, where your number sits, your absolute number that you're reading sits. It gives you an idea of where you are on its scale of.
Yeah, I think my experience in the past with those has been they've been quite good if you've got sort of a partial short, or you've got like an insulation reading that's jumping a bit around when you're doing it, maybe a bit of damp on a circuit or a bit of water there, but you can see it sort of where it's giving you a bit of fluctuation, where actually, you know, you don't necessarily see that as clearly on just a purely numeric display. So I thought that was quite a nice, a nice little feature in there that I liked. The next one we can talk about, but we haven't really tried it out. But this is something you expect to see on the more advanced multifunction testers, is the ability to do a fall of potential earth spike test. So we have actually got spike kits that are available to work with this. And if you wanted to use this as an earth resistance tester, effectively you can connect that up and you can actually do your earth resistance testing with this MFT. So next on the dial, Dave, we're on to ZS.
Yes, your loop impedance testing. What can we say about that, Kevin? Different.
It does it.
We have different current ranges: 6, 9, 12 milliamps, or there's a setting there marked as trip, which of course is the one you would use if you didn't have an upstream RCD.
Yeah, so you've sort of got 3 different currents there of no trip. So again, you know, different sensitivities of test current to actually dial in. So if maybe you're getting a bit of RCD uplift, or you're getting a bit of no, you know, sort of tripping problems, maybe you can drop the currents down and try those. So it's the first tester I've seen with multiple no trip options.
Same here, yeah, and I did have a play with them and got the same results with also. In terms of basic testing, as a house basher, speaking as a house basher, there's a basic testing, it doesn't really matter which option you set, so long as you're either on a no trip or a trip. It's a 3-lead test for no trip measurements.
Yes. So there's no two lead option on there.
You're only on 2 leads if you're upstream of an RCD.
Yeah.
And not going to cause any kind of tripping trouble.
You've got the ability to zero the leads for the ZS test on here, which was an interesting
another
one
first,
as well.
yeah, I've seen, yeah.
It's something I've been asked about before, is, you know, should we be zeroing the leads for ZS tests, you know, with other MFTs and things, and actually having that ability can't hurt, you know, actually being able to zero your leads and actually null that off your ZS readings. Again, it probably makes minimal impact on the readings, but
make any difference.
It's got that feature in there.
My understanding was always that nulling was required for a low ohm readings, but when you're talking about a live test with on an AC source, then the impedance of the probes wasn't, or the resistance of the probes wasn't particularly.
Yeah, I suppose maybe if you're talking an industrial system with very low ZE values.
But then that probably betrays the fact that it is made for that more industrial market, where these numbers perhaps matter more than the likes of you or I are used to in the domestic environment.
Next mode, again, something we probably don't use a lot, but it may be of use in there, which is actually the volts drop scale. So very similar to the ZS test, but it's done obviously between line and neutral. And you seem to, the way it works, I think, is you set a sort of reference reading at the origin, you go to the end of the circuit, you take the measurements, you sort of tell it what circuit it's on, and it sort of works out the
volts drop's always a bit of a tricky one, really, isn't it? Because ideally you want to be doing it at source and destination at the same time to get the characteristics of the load that you're firing up. Tricky to do that, of course, but I've only ever done it a couple of times myself before, because my Metrals testers I've had previously have supported it, and it tends to be on a long run to an outbuilding, something like that, where you just want to get some kind of indication as to whether the maths is working out for what that volt drop ought to be under the load that you're running there.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes. I mean, it's been in the wiring regs for a long time. The requirements for to sort of verify your voltage drop, put it that way round. And I've always thought when you go in to do like an EICR or an addition to an installation where you don't really know what voltage drop on the sub-main, what voltage drop on the sort of bits of the final circuit, you're adding on to the end of that, you know, maybe there's some options in there for doing it. But like you say, it does tend to be sort of on the more top end testers like the Betrels. You do see it as a feature. I can't see it being really a killer application that people are going to use a lot in the UK, really. But
domestically speaking, again, I've not had cause to use it much except for very long runs to outbuildings where I've just wanted to verify the maths. But Guidance Note 3, inspection and testing, does say that for initial verification, you don't necessarily need to take a measurement. You can go by what the mathematics.
Well, you'd hope the designer had done the maths really on that side.
If it's initial verification, then presumably you are the designer, and your maths, if it's done correctly, ought to indicate that there shouldn't be a problem. But if you wanted to verify that, or if, like you said, you're on inspection and testing and you want to check somebody else's design is actually working according to spec, then you have that option.
RCDs, we're onto the RCD modes now. Obviously, this being a sort of continentally type product, the first one is the ramp, so they generally tend to look at the ramp values quite importantly on there. So we've got the ramp settings and then we've got the normal RCD settings.
Yeah, they're under two separate dial.
Yeah, but they are pretty much the same options on there. One's simply doing a ramp test, the other one is doing a sort of tripping time test.
Fantastic range of RCD types. 610, 30, 100, 300, 500, 650 and 1000. Now again, I've not had cause to come across many of these in the kind of work I do, but that's the best range of RCD options I've ever seen.
And if you don't like those options, there's also
the variable.
So you could go and actually set what current you want. So this sort of came up recently where there was certain RCD manufacturers who Dave's familiar with, who actually were testing to a slightly different interpretation of the standard. So you were doing a sort of a 250 milliamp test. I understand it.
That's not to say it was wrong. The specification allowed for those RCDs to be tested at a 5 times 40 milliamp test, but not your normal 150 milliamps that most MFTs are going to be putting out. They wanted to see 250 milliamps, and the only other instrument I've come across that has that option to set a variable test current, where you can whack it up to say 50 milliamps on here, is your higher end sort of mega series, C17 series mega, but I've not come across any other instruments that has that, including things like the Metrol MI3152. Don't think that's got anything like that. So
I think there's a bit of future proofing in there, and it also gives you that variability that if you do come across something that's maybe in a commercial industrial where you've got a variable RCBO or something like that, where you really want to dial it in right, and you've got the function in here to do it.
And again, that range of options, it shows that it's a commercial tester, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think also the range of the actual, the other one is the actual, oh sorry, that's the same one. The types of RCDs we've got on here as well, because we've got the AC, the A, and the Type B DC RCDs are all covered in here, and also things like the time delayed as well. So all of that is in here. One thing it hasn't got is the auto RCD sequences. Now this may have been a bit of a drawback, shall we say, in past years, but now obviously under the wiring regulations they're pretty much looking for a one-times test.
Indeed, if you want to perform additional testing on your RCDs for their particular type, or for a 5 times test, a half times test, anything like that, obviously you can do so. But if you're just talking about filling out a condition report or even an electrical installation certificate on initial verification, all BS 7671 really requires is your AC 1 times test, which you would perform obviously at 0 and 180 degrees to take the higher number of. So is auto RCD testing as important as it perhaps once was? I must admit, it was never a feature I particularly used a lot. I always just used to, even though I've got it on my other instruments, I for whatever reason, it's not one that I tended to use very often, because I would just take my individual tests. Yeah,
again, in the comments below, is the RCD auto test a deal breaker for you, or now do you find yourself very rarely using it because of the changes in the regulations? Again, we'd be interested to know, so drop it down in the comments below from that side of things. So beyond the RCD testing, this is where we get into the sort of premium features that we don't see really on anything else, and this is where it sort of shows its Chauvin Arnoux roots, where it merges into a power quality analyzer a little bit with some of these things. So the next one really on here, and we haven't actually got this plugged in because I didn't order one at the time, so I need to get one ordered in, is there's a clamp, so there's a current clamp. I know some MFTs that, you know, sort of have this option to get a current clamp that goes with it, and this current clamp will work as a leakage clamp down to about 5 milliamps, I think we looked at, didn't we? Up to about 200 amps. So you can use it as a leakage clamp, but you can also use it for the current measurements which are built into this thing, and that's some of the stuff we'll talk about a little bit more, but you've actually got that option on there to use that leakage clamp as well as a current clamp.
Yeah, earth leakage on an MFT is very rare. I don't know why, because it's a jolly useful function. Obviously everybody has to then go out and buy a traditional clamp for their earth leakage measurements if they're undertaking such, but again, the only other instrument that I've seen earth leakage on is the TIS MFT Pro, so it's a very rare feature to see on
I believe
MFT.
I believe probably the top end megas have an optional clamp that goes with them. I think
I've not played with the X1 or anything.
Yeah, I think some of the MFTs, you know, have that as an available option, but it's certainly available with this. But this doesn't just do the leakage, that's the important bit. This is when we start to go into the next ranges, you'll see the other stuff that it actually does on there. So the next setting on here, Dave, is the phase rotation. So again, this is something, you know, looking to work on 3-phase installations, not just your sort of traditional domestic market where you'd probably expect to have that in
even
here.
Domestically, you do come across 3-phase on some larger houses, but also domestically speaking, we sometimes get called out to offices or whatever. It's not. A house basher isn't always bashing houses, of course. There are small commercial works, there are home offices, there are smaller installations that have 3-phase, and there will be times when you need a 3-phase tester. I've got a separate one that I purchased because at the time none of my MFTs supported phase rotation. I've now got ones that do, but it's one of those features where when you need it, and it's great to have it as part of your MFT because the less of a loadout you have to carry around, the better.
And particularly if you've gone to a fault or a breakdown or something, you can just grab the tester, take it, and you know.
Besides which, I need it so rarely that often when I do need to use it, I can never find the flipping thing.
All the batteries have gone,
exactly.
Leads missing or whatever. So having it built in is useful, and obviously having that feature in here is what you'd expect from a sort of more commercial, industrial targeted instrument that's you know, designed maybe for more use on 3-phase installations and things like that. So we're connected up now to the single-phase supply, and this is some weird stuff that you don't normally get on an MFT. So you can probably see on here we've got a sine wave, so we're actually getting a oscilloscope type reading for the sine wave that we've got, and this is what we're referring to as the sort of the wattage mode. So on here, if we also had the current clamp, what we can do then is we can actually take measurements of the power, the kilowatts, and actually look at what's being used within the installation, energy efficiency, all of that sort of thing, and also the shape of the waveform, the voltage waveform, the current waveform. So what do you think of that, Dave, being on there?
Very unusual, not come across any other instruments with that kind of functionality, but again, like you say, that this is where you're getting into your sort of more your top end that other testers just can't measure up to.
Yeah, so it is unusual to have an MFT, but obviously taking advantage of the large screen on there, and I think this is the same screen that's used within some of our Qualistar power quality analyzers, so they have very much utilised some of that technology within this. So we've got the sort of wattage mode where we can look at the power, look at the voltage, the current waveforms and all that sort of stuff in there. But really where we take it to the next level is the next step across, which is actually where we can start to look at harmonics. So in the harmonics mode, we can actually do simple things like THD. So THD is total harmonic distortion, and that's quite useful within installations to actually get an idea of whether you've got a harmonics problem or not. It's just a very simple reading. You can do your current or your voltage, THD, to actually get an idea of have you got a harmonics problem or not. But if you want to go further than that, and this is where this thing gets really impressive, is we've actually got a full reading on here up to the 50th harmonic for individual harmonics. So we can actually look on here, we can look at the voltage harmonics or the current harmonics. It does a fast Fourier transform and actually puts those on the screen for us. and we can actually look at the individual harmonics.
I mean, obviously that looks pretty dreadful at the moment, but you're looking at that as a logarithmic display, aren't you?
Yeah.
It can switch between logarithmic and linear. So logarithmic is accentuating these...
It is, it's showing the lower values.
Yeah, these smaller harmonics, showing them as larger than they really are. If you switch that to a linear display, then it'll flatline a lot more. But again, you've got that option. You can also view it in a table form.
Yeah, so we can actually look at these readings in the form of a table. So I can actually just go over into that now if we wanted to. Just go down into the values there. And what it will do is actually gives us the values, but it gives us in the form of an individual table. So we can see the individual harmonics within there. So traditionally, this is only the sort of functionality you would see in a power quality analyzer. There's no other way that you would get this data really from that side of things. You would need a power and energy logger like the PEL, or potentially, you know, into the Qualistar range of power quality analyzers. So actually having that ability within this tester really gives you another string to your bow to start getting into that sort of end of the market, you know. So if you are an electrician who's looking for an MFT, you're slightly interested in the power quality side of things as well, this offers you sort of a really powerful, I mean, up to the 50th harmonic is, you know, that's really good going for a lot of these type instruments, you know, that similar performance you'd expect from maybe one of our power and energy loggers, for example. So they're not just playing at it with this, that is actually a proper function that's in here.
But as well as that, if you need to leave that running for any length of time, you can actually plug it in and it will run off the power supply.
Yeah, so one advantage of having the separate power supply socket on it, it's a bit like a laptop power supply, it just plugs into the end there and it charges the battery while you're using it. So that's
a feature, again, I haven't seen on other instruments. Again, you go back to something like the high-end Metral, you've got a physical shutter to prevent you from being able to plug the charger in at the same time as the test leads, because these other instruments will only run on battery, but that you can plug in and leave whizzing away if you're trying to monitor something over a longer length of time.
So I think that's useful, you know, if you, like say, you're working at a distribution board or maybe you're commissioning a piece of machinery or something, you do a lot of testing in one place, you can actually run it on that, or obviously use it on the battery from that side of things. So yeah, I think that's great.
Super stuff, and there's going to be more on your channel as you start putting it through its paces, I imagine, over the coming weeks, Kevin?
Yeah, there certainly is. As we start doing this, we're going to start breaking down some of the functions and obviously give you better screenshots and things like that. This was just a first take, really, and obviously one of the things is we are going to be aiming at, you know, electrical contractor market. So we thought, while we've got an actual electrical contractor in the building, it would be worth getting Dave's opinion on this, because I know a lot of people set a lot of store by the tests that Dave does on stuff, you know, and you'll get an honest review from that side of things.
Don't listen to anything I say, for goodness sake.
So we thought, who better to have a first look at this MFT for us? And yeah, I mean, we are quite pleased with this. Obviously, just talking over it generally from this side of things, it is Cat 4 rated as well. So 300 volts Cat 4 rated, which means it can be used upstream of the main distribution board. So I know there is a complaint with some of the cheaper MFTs on the market that they're not actually Cat 4 rated. So technically they need to be used on the fixed wiring or downstream of the main switch. So again, this being Cat 4 rated is you know, important, and also it points to its more sort of industrial roots, shall we say, with that thing. But I think as a first look at this, it's quite a good instrument. You know, it's a chunky instrument. It does the stuff. What it does very well. It seems to be very accurate and offers you a lot of extras really in there, and things like the earth resistance testing, the current clamp, the power, the harmonics, all of these extras that you'd expect to see on a premium product, really. So if anybody is looking for a premium MFT, if you've discovered Chauvin Arnoux and you sort of, you know, you like what we do and you like the quality of the products that's there, maybe have a check out of our products and see what's going on. And if you'd like to arrange a demonstration of this, just get in touch, drop a message down in the comments, and we're more than happy to show it to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.